Well, hello to everybody. And to be really in the present, I can tell you that my heart is beating faster. So there is no doubt about that we are in a live event, and the fact of seeing all of you suddenly appearing one after the other and all this part of Europe, of the world, even because I know we have Thomas from Australia, or Tasmania, I should say. My heart is, yeah, it's like, stage fright, something like this. It's like, whoo, it's been a long time. This has not existed. No performance, hardly any opportunity of having stage fright. And here we are. We are together. That's great. So, yes, we are actually in the middle of our event in France called Mix Up that has been introduced by and helped by Fest from the beginning, especially around the World Storytelling Day, which is the 20th next week. So we've started last week, and we actually are, I would like to say in the beginning that the impulse of all this have started within the Fest project. We have this, as you know, Strand 3 group, which is a group that has been working on the idea of higher education, master, university, link with a university, and working on this project of making a curriculum for higher education for future generation of storytellers. And so we've been working the last years. At each conference, we have made a report on the work that has been done by this group. But last year, because of COVID and because of the lockdown in March, we had to take the decision to continue our work on visio conference, on Zoom and this type of media. And so we took the challenge of doing that. And we had two major projects, one with Oslo Met, which was storytelling, the creative process, and the one with Berlin University, which is led by Ragnhild here, which was about the topic that we're proposing tonight, about stereotypes, heteronormativity, racism, discriminations, and all these problematic images that are sometimes vehicled when we tell stories, consciously or unconsciously. And we have noticed last year, as working together, that we were really deeply interested. The group that has been formed for this workshop last year was Ragnhild Mørch, which is here. Can you say something so you appear, Ragnhild?
Hi, hello.
So Ragnhild, and she will introduce herself. Then we have Florian Fischer. Can you unmute yourself?
Hello.
This is
in all directions.
And there is Luís.
Hello.
Who's there? So Ragnhild, Luís, and me, we are part of Strand 3 work. And Florian has been part of this masterclass seminar that we had last year. And we had this masterclass last year 3 times a week, the 4 of us together, discovering how to work together, but also how to work with, you would say we had 4 young storytellers with us each time. And we have been fascinated by this work. And so I proposed for Mix Up 2021 that it would be another opportunity to work again together, trying to reach a French-speaking audience. And you have to know that Florian and Luís speaks really good French, and Ragnhild understands everything. So it was a very good team to do it in France, and we just had it last week, the 4 of us, with a very small group of 5 storytellers, French storytellers. And the conclusion of this work of last week is that we would like to propose you to be introduced as a team. Actually, this is the creation of a team. The 4 of us are really want to be recognized as a team, and we want to continue this work because we think there is something really important. And the group of energy, of knowledge, of shared experience that we have been through, the four of us, makes us really this very strong feeling of being a team. So the idea of tonight is to share the ideas that we've been sharing within ourselves, within the storytellers we had with us from last year and this year, trying to have our ideas clear, to propose ideas to you. And as it is a forum, and in the sense of a forum, we will expose ideas, and then after that, you will have the speech for the one who wants to discuss about it. And of course, it's an open discussion that is certainly made to last, we hope, a long time. So as you know, we all are storytellers for most of us. So we are extremely talkative. This is one of our quality. This is why we are storytellers. So we propose to do a little rule for tonight is Ragnhild will hum. Can you hum, Ragnhild? You have to unmute yourself each time because otherwise. Can you see her appearing? All of you, you see her? Can you nod so I can see if yes?
I probably sound like a cow. I wonder what that means.
Can you show the little object that you have there?
I've got a little timer here and it lasts for 5 minutes. And after 3 minutes, I will hum. So that we do not talk forever. So someone has to hum for me. So you will take over that, Abbi, I'm sure.
Yeah. And so that's the idea. We will go around. The rounds will be about, we have the same, in a way, the same frame for these rounds. The first round will be a presentation of why we are there and why these ideas are so strong in us and who we are with these ideas today in our very different situations. And this is our first round. The second round will be around the idea of what is the past bringing to us today. And the third round will be about future and how we see the future of this storytelling movement and impersonal for all of us. So, and then it will be you. So that's the general frame in which we're going to be. And I think if we all agree about that, it will start, and that means I will be the first to introduce, and Ragnhild will look at the time. Is it okay, Ragnhild, Florian, Luís? Have I been clear? And all of you, is it all right? My English is as it is, but I guess most of you have met me already in conferences, so you're used to this English with a tiny French accent and a Norwegian spirit. Skål. All right, Ragnhild, hum.
I'm ready. I will, you can start.
So in the 80s, I was fascinated by storytelling, that it could be an art, that it could be a renewal. I was coming from a theater education. I was educated in theater, history of theater, improvisation theater, contemporary theater, text theater, experimental theater. I had an education in theater, physically, mentally, and also by experience. And when I started to be, or let's say, be a storyteller, I had no education in storytelling. I did not even know really that it had been an art form before. My fascination was that it was a door open to something new, unknown, that could be discovered, practice, make a living out of it. But my education, I had to do it with the time. And, you know, in the French system, it is so made that you can have subsidized, that you can create a company, that you can create events, and that you are helped to be a creative artist. And because of that, and grâce à ça, fortunately, there's a lot of questions that I have never really handled from the start. I was fascinated by doing things, looking at Forbes, dreaming about what could have been storytellers if it has not been interrupted, trying to understand the role of orality, what was the difference between theater and storytelling, what was the skills needed. And I used my life as a performing artist to try to understand all these things by doing new performance every year, because that's the way we do in France. You are helped and subsidized. You do a new show every year, and then you try to sell it. And while I was doing that, I was always looking at the content. What is the content that I could use to make a performance? What was the skill needed to perform these stories? And in a way, I think that through this type of artistic approach, I have avoided a lot of problematics that I have never seen before, that were included in oral tradition or oral stories. And for a very, very long time, these questions has never came to my mind. And but then, after a while, I was interested in transmitting, leading workshops and having a younger generation. I wanted them to be fascinated by the oral storytelling skills like I had been. And then it started from the beginning, the question of the material, the stories. And I did not really understand from the start why the young storytellers had so much problem with what we call traditional oral tales. It was difficult for them. And most of the time, all the so-called Marvel tales were off their repertory. And always the answer was, it's too difficult. It needs so much time to work. And we don't have the opportunity that you had to perform so many times the same story, so that you find your own organicity and create your own version of stories. We don't have this opportunity. These stories are too difficult. And I always thought that's because they are lazy, or that's perhaps it's more difficult than I even understand by myself. But there is a question there. There's a problem. And then there's been a few different shocks, but I guess this is for my next round, to understand that it's, for me, what is important, it's that it's in the act of transmission to younger generation that most of the questions that we're going to speak about raised came to me, and I needed to understand them better to transmit. And that's when I met Ragnhild. Well, actually, I knew Ragnhild for a long time because we had been working together on one of these labos that I was, I would say, creating or animating, or anyway. So I knew Ragnhild for a long time as more or less as a companionship. But then one day, she handled me with a very vital question. Ragnhild.
Thank you, Abbi. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm gonna say a little bit about my path that led to actually asking Abbi and Luís and Flo to join in on this project. And it started really in a way in 2008, because at that point I was commissioned to do a show, and I was asked to do a show about being half Norwegian, half German, and not fitting into the heteronormative box. And I sort of almost dropped down dead because I thought that's not a topic anyone can ask me to do a show about. And it was a very good colleague and friend of mine who asked it, so it made me think. And it ended up me doing this show. I called it Multiplicity. And in connection with the show, I bought this book, and I'm going to put it in the chat afterwards. It's called Understanding Prejudice and Discrimination, because what I wanted to make a show about was, oh, is someone timing me? No, I think that was about a minute. Okay, what was that, 2 minutes already? Okay, you time it. Okay, good. Thanks, Luís. So, because I was dealing with prejudice and discrimination and thinking inside of the box in this show, I read this book. And I read it, of course, coming out of a situation where I was dealing with discrimination and being stereotyped, being part of a minority. I found a lot of very interesting things, and I also started grasping the concept of racism. It was a fantastic website to this book, and I discovered things in the newspaper. I even wrote to the guy who had published this and said, oh, I discovered this racist image in Norwegian newspaper. And he wrote back to me and said, to be honest, I can't respond to your discoveries. Anyways, what happened though, even though I had a little sensitivity for these images at that point, they sort of went in here and they went out there. And in hindsight, I think it's because whilst I was aware of me being a minority at some parts, I was totally blind on my privileges, and I was totally blind on being a majority at some points. And 8 years later, 2016, Florian, who you will meet later in more detail, he joined the course that I'm running at the University of Arts in Berlin. And after the first weekend, he and a colleague, who some of you have met in a different forum, Annika, the two of them came to me and asked, Ragnhild, could we maybe look at problematic imagery in stories? And I was twisting my brain, trying to think of what kind of difficult imagery had we had during the weekend. We were doing animal tales, and I was very surprised. And then we had a talk, and they related some imagery to me, and it's sort of, it opened up some doors. I didn't understand all of it, but we agreed that Florian would do a session at the next weekend. So I skipped some of my plans, and Florian was doing a session with the students and me. And that was a real eye-opener. That was extraordinary, because I realized that there's so much I don't know. And the title of last year, What Are We Talking About, is really about that. It's, no, I didn't know what I was talking about a lot of the time. With some, I know, because I know my situation, and I know where the discrimination lies and the stereotypical thinking. And with others, I had no clue. And so Florian has been part of the course since then, and he will continue to be part of the long-term course in Berlin. But I also thought this is so important that we look at, and that I look at more, because I then started sort of finding more blind spots, that in connection with Strand 3 and Fest, I then asked Abbi, who I've worked with quite extensively, who's been sort of my training, or my master storyteller, who I've joined, and Luís, who was also in Strand 3, because I knew his background. So as a team, then we wanted to look at these issues and topics together. And that's how this course last year came to be. And from there, it's just sort of, it's opened up so many doors and discoveries in the sense of looking at who I am and looking at what stories I'm telling and what stories I'm not telling. And I will say more about that in the next rounds. And I think that's probably 5 minutes. Cool.
So I think naturally, Florian, you are called to join the conversation, obviously. You can unmute yourself and join us.
Okay. Thank you, Abbi. Thank you, Kati. Thank you, Ragnhild. I'm very happy, very pleased to be here with all of you. And I'm joining the heart-pounding fraction. And because I'm also a bit humbled, because I think I imagine I'm one of the persons with the least storytelling experience here in the room, in this virtual room. So it's really great to be with so many storytellers. So as Ragnhild said, I came to storytelling in 2016, rather by accident, quite spontaneously, I would say. I was fascinated by storytelling, but I didn't know that such thing as storytelling as a course existed. And it was pointed out to me that such a course existed, and I registered like within a week, and then everything started to get in motion. And my professional background is from a very different angle. So I'm a freelance educator. So I work in freelance education for 12, 13 years now. And since 7, 8 years focusing on, or 10 years focusing on discrimination in different forms, mostly on racism and whiteness, meaning like how racism has shaped our societies, how colonialism has shaped our societies, how racism has shaped me as a white person, and how I'm reproducing it, willingly, unwillingly, and on gender issues and masculinities. So how I'm shaped as a man, being brought up as a man, and what images and ideas of masculinity, and how this also limits me as a person. Like a very traditional patriarchic form of masculinity. So this is the background that I came from into the storytelling course. And as Ragnhild said, there were stories being told that I found had stereotypical images in it, because the side effect of my professional background is that I became more and more sensitized towards stereotypical imagery in our society, and also therefore in storytelling. And to be honest, in my becoming a storyteller, I would say I'm still in it. I hardly say I'm a storyteller, although I tell stories on stage, but I still say like I'm a becoming storyteller, because of the problems of stereotypes, because there was a really big challenge and hindrance for me to really dive into storytelling. First of all, with the stories I encountered, I read in books, or that were brought to me or were told to me, and the images with these stories. And then second of all, also, because at some point I realized I stopped inviting some friends of mine to storytelling performances that we were doing at the University of the Arts in Berlin, because we had to do storytelling performances in our formation, our course. And I stopped inviting certain friends who I knew would be are very sensitive towards racist images, gendered images, problematic gendered images, heteronormative images, because of their own position, their own experiences, their own perspective. What does that actually mean? I didn't, that's 3 minutes gone and 2 minutes left?
3 minutes.
Cool. Very irritating. She did the same in the course, I'm used to it. So, and that was kind of, it was hard for me to realize that I don't invite certain friends, because I know they would be offended by the images being brought on stage, and because of some stories being told. And naturally, from where I came from, I wanted to do something about it. And then I was really, really happy and quite touched also how openly Ragnhild embraced our bringing up the issue. And I was really fascinated by the process that we did and that we did with Luís and Abbi in the Fest course in May with the young storytellers, and how much potential, how much power there is in storytelling, actually looking at these images and stereotypical images and on discrimination within storytelling, and how much potential there is in changing things for positive change. And yeah, that made me hopeful, and that's why I do this work. Maybe that's enough for now.
Thank you, Florian. And I think we can now have a little fresh, warm air from the south of Portugal, where Luís is staying. But I think the army has allowed you to be with us tonight. You are not completely locked down.
No, and I'm in the north of Portugal at the moment, in my parents-in-law house. So, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Ragno, for moving the our glass. Some of you I know, others I don't. Nice to meet you, although in this mediatic form. Flo proposed us to present first, to start from a personal perspective, what is a nice way to start, although a little bit more difficult to me, at least. So my parents were Portuguese from Africa, from African colony, the Portuguese colonies in Africa. My mother was from Angola and my father from Mozambique. They have to leave Africa after the revolution, the Portuguese Revolution, and those countries' independence. Then we went to Brazil. I grew up there, listening to these horrible things about the country of origin, Portugal, who abandoned us in Africa and all that. And then when I returned to Portugal, I was already a young man, and I started to study theater. And immediately I found that folklore, Portuguese folklore, not only narrative folklore, but music and dance and everything, was really a way for me to look for some kind of identity, because I had none. My parents were from different countries in this very particular situation. I grew up in Brazil. I came back from Brazil to Portugal in the 90s, where Portuguese culture had a lot of biases and prejudices against Brazilian culture at that time. People would say to me to go home when they listen to my accent in restaurants or in cafes and stuff like that. So looking in folktales and in music, in Portuguese traditional music and folktales, were really a mean to grasp, to find some kind of roots. And when I started to study theater, I immediately found myself in this double positioning. I always loved to think a lot about what I'm doing. Maybe because I'm lazy. I really like to think about it before doing it, or not doing it always. So I studied theater. I studied theater studies. I didn't train myself as an actor. I went to universities to study theater studies, and then I discovered storytelling, because I was already adapting folktales to theater. But then I discovered this amazing thing that is telling stories. So again, this double positioning came, and I had to study. So I started a path as a researcher in university in folklore studies, mainly in folktales. And then it's how I came here. Two of you, Abbi and Ben, that I think is here tonight, Yes, hello, Ben. They were my case studies in my research when I was doing my PhD about oral storytelling as a performative art, as a performing art, and they were both my case studies, very generously and patiently. And so I followed them, analyzing their work and interviewing them. It was great. So I'm listening to humming. Yes, that's a humming.
Yes, it is humming, though it's approximate humming.
Okay. So that's how I got here in this group. That was the background someone mentioned. I'm here part as a storyteller, part as a researcher, mainly as a researcher, I think, and the contribution that I can give to this group is more theoretical, really. And this process has been very transformative to me, really, really completely, not only as a storyteller, not because I'm now looking to my repertoire, the stories I tell in a different way, in a different perspective, but also I'm looking to my research work in a different way. I'm coming out of this, what Flo called me once, neutral standpoint. Was that, Flo? This neutral standpoint, and it was quite revolutionary to me and very emotional also. So that's how I'm here.
Okay, then thank you, Luís, Flo, and Ragnhild. Then we'll go for a second round. And I think listening to Luís, I would say that I'm the opposite. I'm an action man. I'm doing things, and then I try to think about afterwards. And of course, when someone like Luís comes and start to analyze what you're doing, it's like a shock, because you have this possibility through someone else to understand, I would say nearly on the spot, on the same level, something that you do instinctively or instinctively or with your sensitivity without really knowing precisely. And it's, again, I say it's when you want to transmit to a younger generation that real questions arises. One of the shock I had, it has been in the last years, never on performances, but when I was as a storyteller, among storytellers, very often I've been addressed by women asking me why my repertory was only masculine, hero, and why women were really not very interesting and not very present in my stories. I remember once being pretty aggressed by a woman. I remember saying to her, but that's me. And if you want to tell stories with women heroing, do it. Do it yourself. And that's your role as a woman. And I will do my role as a man. It was my way to defend myself. But then one day it became something within a story. And I would quote one day telling one of my favorite story, which is the companionship, the companion that I've been telling for years and years. That's been really my companion as a Marvel tale. There is a very difficult image in this story, which is at the end, to free the woman from the spell of the troll, there is a weeping scene. And this weeping scene, I've always looked at it as a symbolic act. I've tried to make it as true as I can as a storyteller and as a human being, trying to make it as a love scene, as a needed scene. But the reality is, and especially in the last years, has become more or less hardly impossible to tell that scene, really. And the last time I was addressed was actually in Germany with a student of Ragnhild, and Ragnhild herself, saying that she could understand that some people jump out of their seat and leave the room when I'm telling that part of the story. And I really had to say that I said, okay, I have to face some kind of things, but I don't really see exactly. For me, I was always addressing the audience as the loss of this, in a way, romantic loss of capacity of the audience to use symbolic images for what they are, and not realistic images. But I was calling for. But there is a symbolic language, and there is something. But of course, nowadays it's difficult to handle. And I think nowadays it's not even difficult to handle. I think it's just more or less going away, especially in the last years. I think there's been, the change in society is too huge to just base things on symbolic ideas. And when I met Flo and Luís, and they started to talk to me about Luís' vision of orality, and Florian, his experience, like he just said, I was up, and I must say I was completely shocked by I would say, all the privileges, all the power, everything I was carrying, I would say unconsciously or consciously, that I would assume. And that it was a shock saying, okay, I cannot continue like this. I have to face these questions, especially if I transmit things to a younger audience, because otherwise, and I've heard a lot of young storytellers standing to me, but we don't dare to change things because we've heard we should not change anything. And I said, yes, now I'm an old storyteller. I'm a romantic storyteller. I came through the love of stories, but now my position is absolutely different. I see that also as a danger. You cannot just tell things because you think that we're supposed to be told like this. You have to improve things by yourself, and you have to be able to carry the weight of what you're saying with who you are. And that was the beginning of a total new track. And I'm now, like Luís said, looking at my own repertory that I've been building for years on a total different perspective. And I think that's the end of my time.
Yes.
And I will now address Ragnhild, Florian, Luís. Who wants to continue? There is no set round. Luís?
I can do it, otherwise it will be the silence, the strange silence.
It's about time.
Well, I said a lot of things, Abbi, that has echo in the things we have been talking and working on and everything. I have two things that really, it's the way we see folk tales and the way the importance, the sacrality we give to these narratives from ones, and the other is this idea of that they are unchanged during time and during transmission, during oral transmission. And there's two important ideas to remember, and that changed a little. I was already maybe sensitive to some of those questions, but really the work with Flo especially, and we all together, made me see things that I was not seeing before. Like it's amazing how these ideas of what is orality, what is oral tradition, what is this material folktales. It's amazing how the ideas that we kept and we hold so dear are really founded very, very, very in this early folklore theories that were really framed in nationalism, romanticism, evolutionist theories and everything. So it was always this, because, you know, everything started when, not everything, it's a little bit, I'm just being, I don't know, provocative a little bit, but everything started when this white folks, scholars from Europe and North America started to look to all the peasants at home or the tribes in exotic countries in the colonies, looking at them, trying to find the originality, the pure, the essence of the human being, because they were primitive. They were close to nature. They were living in community. They were animist. They have all this symbolic thinking. And I'm talking in their voices, and we are the civilized. We lost the connection to the nature. We lost this ability, as you said, to see things symbolically. And if we come to, in all different approaches, early approaches, if you come from the anthropology, or if you go to the first psychoanalytic approaches, or even that, for example, Joseph Campbell summarized it so well, all these different approaches, you'll see that a lot of these ideas are still, I don't know how to translate that to English, is holding these early ideas and these early perspectives. So this, and about 2 minutes. And then the other one, the other vision is visions that were given to us from the same theories about orality and how oral transmission worked in oral, in traditional, between comma, contexts. We have the early approaches, and still are, in fact, this idea that oral tradition in some ways is a little bit more static than written tradition, because it has all these constraints by tradition, that social tradition. And in fact, we know now, because of the works of folklorists, that originality, creativity, singularity was always appreciated in these oral transmitters, in these oral storytellers. So the stories have always been changed and adapted to the taste of the audiences, to the new cultural context, to new, and well, every time a story changes language, for example, to travel, it is completely transformed. You know that when you translate ourselves, you're not only translating our discourse, we're translating the story itself. We're changing things. So stories have always been changed, and I really advocate this liberty to, we are today now, and we have to change stories. But I can continue to talk about it later.
Flo, I think he mentioned you. I think it's a natural step.
Ah, okay. Sorry, I so long the distance in virtual. Okay. So this round that we're doing, the second round, is titled "How the Past Influences the Present." Huh? We agreed on that. Yeah. And I thought I would use this round to give a very tiny, short, like, glimpse into the work that I usually do, but like, I mean, really like a tiny glimpse. And the idea is, and I will focus a bit on racism, because I know, Ragnhild, you look at gender questions. Okay. And so the idea is, when looking at racism and how racism has shaped me personally, or us as a society, or us as storytellers, it's, on the first step, very important to get racism out of the far right extreme corner of society, because that's where people are like, what, I'm racist? No, I'm not racist. I'm not like a Nazi, and I don't run around hitting certain people or something. That's not the point. The idea is to place racism really on an everyday basis, in our everyday speeches, actions, interactions, etc. So I know that personally, and I think everybody in the room, but I speak for myself, so I know that personally I've been growing up with racist images, and with images that come from a colonial past that white Europeans share, and from colonial structures that are still influencing us today. And just to give like a very short, I wanted to share something, just to give very short examples. And I hope it works, the sharing. We tested it beforehand. Can you see the page? Abbi, Luís, I see you now. Can you hold up the thumb if you see the page? Okay, cool. So, for example, just to give a quick example of like childhood books, comics, children's books that I've been growing up with, for example, that many of them contain stereotypical imagery, racist imagery, exotifying imagery of non-white, non-European people, of Muslims, of Sinti and Roma, so-called, as a racist term, but so-called gypsies, of Native Americans, of Asians, of Africans, of Arabs. The idea of the Orient itself is like a white European idea and construct. Already, wow, okay. So moving on very quickly, and we see that in our everyday life, in the things we consume, in games we play, in advertisement we see, things that are in our museums that come from our colonial past, in racist traditions such as blackfacing, when white people paint their faces black to play black people. It's a very racist tradition from the United States and from Europe also. And of course, we see it in storytelling. This is like a mid-cover of the book of 1001 Nights, the German version. And we see like the exotification and the eroticization that is an idea of the Orient, one of many ideas of the Orient. And this is like a present-day example of 2017 from Germany. And I hope no one is offended and involved in that, because it's okay if you were involved in that, but it's just a very regular example of many possible examples of storytelling. It's like fairy tales from 1001 Nights, it's called. And in the flyer it says, flying carpets, Aladdin and the magic lamp, the Sultan's courageous daughter, gloomy wizards and great treasures of gold, the magic of the Orient enchants us all. And here within like one sentence, we have many of the very stereotypical images that we share in Europe of the Orient, of Arab cultures or traditions. Another example would be native storytelling and ideas that we have of native culture, of native history, and the ideas and the knowledge we don't have about native history, what we lack knowing about it. Coming to the quote that sums it up for me quite well, by a Black psychoanalyst who has taught in Germany. She's originally from Portugal, Grada Quilomba, who said, like concerning racism, white people often ask, am I racist? That's a moral question that's not really helpful, because the answer would always be yes. Yes, because we grow up with racist imagery. Our imagination is colonized and racialized. We need to understand that we are brought up to think in colonial and racist terms. Instead, the question should be, how can I deconstruct my own racism? That would be a helpful question that already undermines the first resistance, denial, and sets the psychological process in motion. Time is up.
Time's up.
Yeah. Maybe I leave it with Grada Quilomba, and then we have more time later.
Okay. Someone doing the time, please?
Yeah.
All right. I want to start with telling you a little story, which is one of my favorite, very short stories, and it goes like this. One early morning in a little pond, there were two fish swimming, and they met an old fish, and the old fish said, "Good morning, how is the water?" The two fish swim on, and then after a while, one looks at the other and says, "What the hell is water?" So, going from the past to the present, I have brought another book that I wanted to look at, and this is the book. I will put it in the chat as well. It's Walter Ong, this is the German one, Orality and Literacy. Now, this was part of my bibliography when I was studying in Oslo in 94 to 96. And we were meant to read it because we were studying storytelling. And it's a very, very good book. But did I read it? No, I didn't. It took about 7-8 years until I opened it. And it was a revelation, I must say. We are talking a lot about shifting perspective and sort of getting the eyes opened. And this was a revelation. Because all my master teacher had told me, and Ben Haggerty has been mentioned already. I studied with Ben, and I've been with Ben over many, many years. And he taught us all that, you know, work with rhythm, work with rhyme, work with proverbs, work with repetition, alliteration, assonance. And I thought, yeah, he knows what he's talking about. That will be it, right? And when I read the book, I understood why. Because what this book so clearly shows is that we are all literate. We have been trained. We cannot think outside of the box of being literate. We know writing, we know reading, we know what it means to have knowledge outside of our brains lying in books. We do not incorporate knowledge in the same way as they did in the primary oral cultures. And reading on explaining how in primary oral cultures orality functions and why it functions the way it did and why we use rhyme and rhythm and all these different poetic elements, artistic means, let's call them that. Suddenly it made me realize that because I'm illiterate, there's so much I don't know of how communication, verbal communication works. And so having the possibility to read how different a mind works and how imagery is transmitted in orality and how memory is shaped and why we remember things easier than other things, that was really, really helpful. But I think today, when I look back at this moment when I read it, it was one of those moments where there was a really strong shift of perspective. And so I'm thinking of this fish story a little bit because we're all surrounded by literacy. We're all surrounded by what is not oral, and we don't see it until we really dig into and understand why orality was as it was, why stories were transmitted as they were transmitted. And this story, I can't remember where I got the story from with these two fish, but I found it on the internet, and it was by the late David Foster Wallace, and it was part of his 5 takeaways, or his it was part of a speech he gave, a commencement speech for students. And he had one part in it, and I'm going to, hopefully, can I manage? Do I have the time for this? I'm going to quote him, and I'm going to put it in the chat because I found that quite amazing what he said in this speech. And I have to put on my glasses. And do I have 30 seconds? No one was humming. Can I read it? So, you are not the center of the universe. A huge percentage of the stuff that I tend to be automatically certain of is, it turns out, totally wrong and deluded. I've learned this the hard way, as I predict you graduates will too. Here is just one example of the total wrongness of something I tend to be automatically sure of. Everything in my own immediate experience supports my deep belief that I'm the absolute center of the universe, the realist, most vivid and important person in existence. Now, talking of shift of perspective, the problem, of course, is I am the center of the universe for me. And it's very easy to forget that everybody else is the center of the universe as well, and to try and open up and see what that means in relation to really getting the grasp of different perspectives. That's sort of my journey in this. And now that was 5.5 minutes for sure. Thank you, Abbi.
All right. So it's already 9 o'clock. And so we'll go for a quick third round. Is that okay? Perhaps we can make it short in 2-3 minutes, so we have the time for question and discussions. One of the things that struck me when Luís made some historical aspect of narrative strategies of yesterday and today about this, what he said about the fact that orality has actually not been at all what I was dreaming about, which would be a purity that was transmitted from generation to generation. That's why the stories were so alive and so full of life. And no, what is full of life is all the changes that has been done by the artist, by the storytellers. And I remember when there was the first real translation of the Grimm Brothers in French, and there was all the quotes, all the different edition, all the time, all the work they've been doing, the collecting, where the stories were coming from. It was like a whole world that fell down to me, like it was the reality of the Grimm brothers' work had nothing to do with my dream of orality. And especially when you know that the Grimm book is one of the most read and translated in the world with the Bible, then I said, this is dangerous. There is an image of something, but the reality has nothing to do with it. So that was the first shock. And the other shock was the Chinese tradition when I was there to study, and I brought a Chinese storyteller here in Europe with me. What was striking is that in this Chinese tradition, the oral and the written was a parallel path since generations and generation. And these two parallel paths were looking at each other all the time. There was no, in my imagination, there was first orality and then it became written, and the orality disappeared. It was my task to be part of this renewal of orality, give speech to the people. But in the reality of the Chinese, it was like two lines, one looking at each other, telling always the same story, changing shape, adding new events, dropping other things. And then there was the Mao time where everything disappeared. But when things started again, well, the books told a few stories, but the orality had to abandon a few stories because there was nobody to tell them. And also because perhaps they were not so much accurate in the Chinese society of now. I don't tell it as an example to link it to Chinese society, but what I was fascinated was by the idea that you could drop some stories, that we just forget them because they have no place now. Just let them go. And we are so much always trying to keep things and, enlarging our data system to have more and more stuff that perhaps we will never go and reach. But what about this idea of sacrifice, of abandoning things? If we don't find a way to tell them in carrying them with our soul today, let's just forget them. And that's, for me, it's a revolution. It is a revolution. And I've heard a lot of storytellers telling stories that they should abandon, especially this unconscious imagery that we bring with ourselves, as Flo says, this thing that we have on us, that we are not conscious, that we just vehicle all the time without understanding, because we don't even see it for ourselves. And then if we don't find solution to these problematic images, then the result is what is happening late, in the late years, is that people are addressing us as really people not interesting, that orality through our stories is past, that we have no place in the society, that this is stereotype stories, like we always are brought back to Disney and all these stereotype images and racist images. And no, we can do something much better than that. But it's a huge work. And I think if there is a shift in time today, and I think why I'm so keen on this education, is that I think young storytellers should know things. They should know the history of orality. They should know how things has been changed and transformed. They should not be identified on a romantic spirit on what is storytelling. It's a difficult task, but it's so revolutionary. And I love the image of in the Caribbean, there was an image of a storyteller who was actually chopped his head off by the power, because once he had the speech, nobody could stop him. And what he was telling was not stereotype and discrimination images. He was speaking about the power of what was actually stopping people to imagine, think, change, be creative, but this empowerment of, how could we say it today, our modern world. We want to be free from that. And I think I really would like that the next generation would be much more educated than I have been, I can say, on the orality, on this and the stories which are in this orality.
Do I do my last round? Flo, do you want to go?
Ragnhild, do you want?
Do you want to go? So I finish. I wrap it up. My part. It's a very short time. I hope we will really have the opportunity to continue this in groups, in smaller groups, in other opportunities, if we met in flesh. I will just say some things. Was wonderful the mention of Ong, Walter Ong, Ragnhild. Is really changing the idea, but I have to confess I don't like him at all in his book. And I loved it until I read Ruth Finnegan, Literacy and Orality, which is the opposite, the name, the title, if you look for it. So you have Orality and Literacy for Walter Ong, and then you have a kind of answer from the folklorist, the English folklorist Ruth Finnegan, saying literacy and orality, and it really changed my mind about Ong's work. And one of the things that I wanted to say, just to say goodbye, is that idea, because this idea of orality, of something, because there is orality as a cultural context, and this orality as a medium of communication, right? There's two different things. And stories were always multimodal and multiformal. They were not picky about how they will be to be transmitted. It was always changing from oral delivery to puppet theaters to painting in skins or in the wall. People would tell stories, even in oral cultures, not only verbally. We always told stories in different ways, in different forms, in different modes, and they travel around modes. So what I think Ong, it was a really great contribution, and it was a really great shift of thinking, but it still was a little bit hold to those ideas that I told in the beginning. And I think Ruth Finnegan is worthwhile reading. Not so famous, unfortunately, and very, very, very clear about this stuff. So that's my last contribution, and I pass to you.
I think Flo is for you because Ragnhild is ending.
Okay. So the last round, for everybody who didn't realize, it's not so obvious, huh? It was about how to move forward, like approaches to move forward. And personally, for me, an approach to move forward as the person who I am, but also as a white male storyteller, the first thing is acceptance and acknowledgement of the world I'm living in. If I realize and if I accept that I'm growing up with a racialized, colonized, gendered, etc., 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 imagination and mind and perspective of the world, of course, it changes something within me. Meaning that I'm not, the person I am is not separated from the storyteller I am. And there's this interesting, like in educational work, there's this interesting saying of when you don't think about it, it's most probably a privilege. So if you have never thought about how you're perceived with your skin color, it's because you're privileged with your skin color. If you've never thought about, if I don't think about, like when I'm invited to an event, to a storytelling performance, and I don't have to think about how accessible the event will be for me, it's because I'm rather able-bodied and society works in a way that my form of body is mostly welcomed in places. If I don't really think about how I am as a male storyteller portraying sexualized violence on stage, it's because it doesn't affect me as much, most probably. And I'm not saying that men don't experience sexual violence, but it's we all know that more women do than men, on average. And so privilege means I don't have to think about it. So if I don't think about it, it's a privilege. And for example, another example would be like, I have a colleague, a friend who's a Syrian Kurdish storyteller in Germany. And he tells beautiful stories from his grandmother from Syria. And he has like a special vest that is a storytelling equipment that he usually would wear. But he hardly wears it here in Germany because he knows the moment he brings it on stage, he gets on stage with that vest as a Syrian Kurdish storyteller, he is immediately placed in a certain spectrum. He's immediately exoticized. He is not the person he is individually, but he is objectified in a certain realm of imagination, Kurdish, Syrian, Arab, Orient, whatever. I don't have that. I can go on stage and I know I'm not put into like a specific, very rigid form of cultural imagination. And it's very interesting because I see that in the chat. I mean, that some chat things like really respond to that, like of different experiences that we made. And for me, it refers a bit to what Luís said in the beginning. When I realized like I'm privileged in many areas, to realize that also my identity matters. I'm not neutral. I'm perceived in a certain way, though I don't realize it because I've been growing up with imagining myself to be neutral, to be the norm as a man, as a white person in the society I'm growing up. And a way forward would be to move out of that neutrality, of that perceived imagined neutrality, and to realize that I'm particular. My worldview is particular. My perspective on the world is particular. My knowledge is very ignorant when it comes to knowledge that happening in the world, to realities that are out there in the world. So that is a way forward to move out of this neutral position. And And to realize that the things we talk about tonight, they're not topics. It's not like, it can be a topic for me. I can make sexism a topic and I talk about it for 2 hours and then I stop talking about it and I can ignore it as a man. And I can talk about racism and I can shut my screen down and I can go out in society and ignore racism because it doesn't affect me as much. But in reality, they are not topics. They are realities that inflict people, that hinder people, that shape people on an everyday basis. And first step for me would also be to not see them as a topic, but as a reality I'm living in. And I was really touched listening to Abbi, Luís, and Ragno, and I was reminded again why I really loved to work with you, because you make yourself vulnerable. Like you expose yourself. You show yourself with the questions and the incertitudes and the hesitations and the questions that you have. And I think that's so valuable. That's so powerful. And that's something that we can all do. And there's a lot with vulnerability, there's a lot of risk and exposure and uncertainty that comes, but the reward is really great because things that we take for granted are suddenly like shaken up. And with this shaking up, like things open up and we can see things from a different perspective. We can learn to change and to grow as persons and as a society, hopefully, eventually. And we don't do things perfectly. And all of us four, we don't do things perfectly. We make mistakes along the way. And that's fine. We all make mistakes permanently. The question is just how we deal with these mistakes. Am I open to listen to other perspectives, to other realities? Am I open to be corrected, to be pointed out? Am I willing to amend, to change, maybe to apologize, to make things different in the future? And I feel this is something that we can all do. And storytelling, I mean, as storytellers, we have the creativity at our hands. And sometimes I feel, sorry to be so blunt, but in the storytelling community I encounter so far, it's sometimes so rigid. Like, why don't we use the creativity and the possibilities that we have to change things? Like, why do we stick to the old? While storytelling has never been sticking to the old. It was always, orality means always changing, always adapting, always new. So I wasn't really preaching, but from the heart.
Ragnhild, the conclusion is yours.
Okay, I will. Sorry, I hadn't put the timer on. I didn't know how to stop you, and I thought I'd be very short. I give my minutes to you because that was really important what you just said. So thank you for that. So I'm just gonna give one of the problems again that we encountered, or rather that I encountered, as an example of what this means to go forward. And it actually fits well into what you said, Florian, about the reality. We can't close it. If anybody of you was here last when we talked about gender in fairy tales, I presented a little personal research I'd done with a book on fairy tales, and I will show it again, and I will show what I've done since. And I need to share my screen for that. I took a German collection of folk tales and looked at the percentage of stories as for representation. I did this based on the genderbread person. You might know it. Can you see it? Is it visible for everyone? Yeah. So I'll just quickly point out that
it's a bit small for us, huh?
It's a bit small. Can we do it bigger? See, I've got this new. Let me have a look. How here. Is this Bildschirmpräsentation? Is that better? Is that big now? Okay. So when I went all through all these stories. They're all just they are not total. They are abbreviated in a small overview. And of course, what I found, it was very imbalanced. So hard gender expression, hardly any stories on cross-dressing, for example. Motives of gender conformity, all stories had gender conformity. Trans motive, one story. Intersex motive, one story. Then man, cisgender, positive lead, 75%. And woman, positive lead, 28%. So we could see where this goes fairly quickly. And even this over here, wedding, marriage, heteronormative motive, it's huge. And the wife as a prize is pretty big. She has nothing to say in the whole story except she's wedded off. So, and I've had huge difficulties in telling traditional tales. And Ben, you will know we have had quite a few conversations about this, and I could never understand what is my problem. I have tons of books at home. I don't sell them, I keep them, but why did I get stuck? I started telling autobiographical and family historic stories. And then, of course, I sort of understood, how do I get to the next image? So I looked at my own repertoire, the time I was working with traditional tales. It's not the complete repertoire, but it's a lot of it. And what I found out, I had a lot of male stories. Most of them had a male hero, positive hero. And there were much fewer female heroes. And so I think I just didn't manage to find my route into finding my reality shown in the stories in the way I would have needed it or liked it. And I didn't find a way to work with it in a way that it really represented my reality. And there we're sort of into this, I'm stopping this now. We're into this, which struck me now in hindsight, is if the generic male is what is in our society, it's in our stories. And I need to be able to sort of rework them in a way that they really have something to say about my reality. And so this is then what I've been working with. And I've started experimenting and looking at how these stories can be transformed. And of course, I will be continuing telling stories with male heroes. It's not about not telling stories with male heroes. It's just to finding a way to getting to the story to really mean what sort of my reality is, and not the perceived reality or the general reality. So.
Thank you, Ragnhild. Thank you, Flo.
Thank you.
And so now I will do a call that comes from Ragnhild's impulse. I will call all the storytellers to do what Ragnhild has done with her own repertory. Make lists, look at the unbalance of your own repertory, be conscious of what you're doing. I have started, it makes me mute my own repertory. And so the vision of your repertory and the vision and understanding of yourself, try to connect the two. And I think if we, in the next conference in Denmark in September, we will all handle lists like, this is my repertory and I'm ashamed of it. This is my repertory, I'm happy about it. This is what I'm doing, this is what I'm not doing. You know, let's shake our beings. And this is a challenge Ragnhild is sending through me to all of you and to all of us. Let's look at what we are talking about. And now Kati, the great Kati, is going to be our help, because we cannot speak all together. So there has been chat, and now I have not looked at the chat, but now I think we can look at it, and then Kati, you will send us.
Thomas, you have the floor.
Okay, yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
sorry.
there you are.
I'm just in the middle of the morning. Sorry, guys. I'm in Tasmania, Australia, so I'm just preparing my kids for the school. So I walked out from. So yeah. So my question was actually very simple. I totally get what you're talking about, and it's really interesting. But I would really enjoy to actually give an example, either as Abbi, Luís, or you, Florian, when you found something like that in one of your stories, and how you made the decision, if you changed it or when abandoned it and then said, that's not what I'm doing. So just because we are talking with a lot of your opinion and emotions, but I think we all would really benefit from some practical examples, not because we want to follow what you do, because it's all our own journey, but it could be really interesting that to see what is your point is. And we all have to do it ourselves, I know, from different point of view, but I'm really interested in, for example, maybe Florian, you can show an example when you found one things in a story, or you, Luís, you said, oh, that's not what I'm doing anymore, or you, Abbi, if you have an example, how you change or abandon the story.
I don't really know where to start. There's so many examples. Ragnhild, I saw, sorry.
I was instantly, because we talked a lot about this story when we first started preparing this course. The version of the Three Lemons, where the slave is, and the bad, the slave and the character who is how do you say that in English? Antagonist? No. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But it's a black slave. So the only character in the whole story is a black slave, and she is the one who's being punished, and she's the one who is the carrying the whole negative imagery in the story. So that's one thing that we discussed quite a bit in the beginning of the course.
I think this is a very clear, this is a very kind of like obvious, but I'm more interested in for the hidden things. You know, that's the crucial point when you come to the hidden part, like which maybe as Florian said, like I might be not aware, you know, and then it would be really good to see one example said, okay, then I understand what you are talking about more.
Well, I gave an example in the beginning on which is more striking than in the 12 Wild Ducks, which is this moment where the heroine, women, has to be whipped by the hero to be free from the spell of the troll. And it's a mixture of imagery that could be a devil or a troll or a power from the other world, which has a spell on the girl, and this is why she behaves in such an incredible violence and negativity. But the image of the freeing of her, not only the hero is not himself, but his companion killing the troll, but then he has himself to whip the girl to free her from the spell. This is, I mean, I've been telling that story quite a lot, and I heard people saying that story, telling that story. And I think the evolution of the understanding of this image it has been changing in my mind a lot. But I still don't know today how to change this moment, because the changing is, you cannot just take it away. There is a need of something, but I have not yet. I've tried to change the gender in that story. That means to change the hero in a heroine, and that to see if she could whip him, to see how it could work. But it did not work. I mean, I did not find it relevant. But still, this image is. It seems obvious that it's a problematic image, but it's not obvious to find a solution. And but a very simple example I can give is that I was working on a caravan of storytellers in France, and they had been they had found a West African storyteller girl who was telling an excision story with a smile, extremely violent story, and smiling all the time, and in the end saying, this is my tradition. And I was so shocked. And more or less in the audience, there was not a lot of people shocked by that. And this is exactly the type of unconscious image that was brought by the storyteller and that was accepted by the audience. And it's full of these examples. You can find a lot for yourself, especially where you live and where people you work with. So there's this conscious aspect, but this unconscious aspect, which is so strong. And sometimes it's someone from the outside that's telling you this is problematic because you don't even see it yourself. So your question is actually difficult as a question because the who is seeing who and what, and you know, and I can see it in someone telling a story. I can tell him this is problematic, but the person will perhaps not see it herself or himself. So this is it's this awareness that is so important, not so much the example, but the awareness.
Maybe one example that was the original example from the course, Ragnhild, that we did when we came up to you, because it's maybe a subtle example, but the question what subtle is and what not maybe also depends on perspective. Maybe something subtle for me that for other people is not really subtle, it's very obvious. But that example was, it was an animal tale that was, I don't know, it was not specified, but it was said it came from Africa. So that's like first step, okay, Africa is quite big, quite different cultures, different populations. So it's quite a generalization to say it comes from Africa. But that was not actually the point. The point was that the person who told the story, and it was about a king, some conversation with a lion, and the portrayal of the kingdom was, in my to my regards, very stereotypical. Like it was, the king was sitting on a wooden chair, and the floor was an earth floor. And then I imagined, like, but how do we talk about kingdoms when I tell the story that I imagine to be in Europe? It's a very different imagery of kingship. And why is that so different? Is it different because there were no stone palaces, no signs, no like huge cities and royal esteblishments in Africa? That's not true. That there was actually many, but I haven't been growing up with these images because I've been growing up with a very stereotypical idea of what Africa looks like. And this stereotypical idea was represented in the story, but it could have been told very differently. And I don't know if that's clear.
Thank you, Florian. I would like to give the floor to Agnieszka. You raised your hand. Agnieszka? Maybe it's an accidental hand raise. Then I saw something interesting in the chat that Nell Phoenix wrote down, and maybe is quite interesting. Hidden parts are in the language too. Would you like to elaborate on that, Nell?
Okay. I mean, just really simplistically, I think there was a beautiful princess. He was a brave man. You know, little indications, even in a story that's been reconstructed for our sensibilities and the, you know, image making faculty of our audiences, whether they're children or adults. Sometimes the shorthand that we use has not been reimagined. And we have a shorthand vocabulary, I think, as oral storytellers. Do you agree with that? But there's loads of things. I'm so interested in this because there are loads of things in my repertoire. I'm going into schools quite a lot, and I get halfway through a story and I look at their faces and I think, I can't say that. I cannot say that, especially images of violence and violence in the home. And I don't know where these children have come from, what their experiences are. And I edit on the spot. You know, that's what I do because I feel that is the responsible thing to do. Because actually, I might not have much time, as someone else said in the chat, to have that discussion like a teacher would, because I'm looking at the clock and I'm going to be out the door in a minute and into the next classroom. So it wasn't a very deep thought, but that's what I was thinking.
I would like to say something, Neil, about that, because I thank you for what you say. My wife, who's a musician who very often performs with me, said to me, can you stop saying this young woman? Can you please stop to say young each time you say woman? And I said, am I really saying that all the time? And I say, why? You know, of course, I'm not the type of writing what I say, so I improvise. But in this improvisation, there is a vague and some insidious things that comes. And I said, but I don't. So she said, next time I'll record you. And I would please stop saying this young woman. A woman is enough. She does not have to be. And this is exactly what happens, is that we don't even understand ourselves, our own, you know, what we bring all the time.
Yeah. Because what she's hearing you say is fertile. And that's inappropriate.
Agnieszka, you returned to us. You raised your hand. Is it accidentally or do you want to tell us something? You are mute.
I'm sorry, I had an accident with my dog, but I'm returning to the audience. It was two questions I wanted to address to Luís, as I am also very admiring Ruth Finnegan works. And this is very interesting because Aung writes about two models of a culture, the oral culture and a written culture. And Ruth is asking this very important question: when oral, how oral, in which circumstances oral? And I think that now, as storytellers of 21st century, we are living in the mixed culture. I mean, of course, the oral world or world of orality passed, but somehow we contemporary storytellers, we try to be back to the times, and we work on this treasures of orality. But of course, we are the representatives of mixed culture. And another question that I think it's very important, it's to say, I mean, I had this thought when I heard Florian's speech, that in such a societies that are more mixed cultured, like for example, I'm working on the Ottoman Empire as a coexistence model of cultures. The problem of stereotypes was solved in a very simple way. I mean, before nationalisms in 18th and 19th century came to the stage, all these tensions were just, the stereotypes were presented in a kind of improvisational theater. The characters were shown like in dell'arte, everything was exaggerated, everything was overexpressed, and it solved the tensions. It was the way how to manage the enemies, the quarrels, the tensions between the antagonist groups. So I think that the storytelling that was the part of this culture was really dealing in this way with stereotyping. And last word, I think that when we unconsciously or consciously we think about the material we tell as storytellers, our role is retelling. I mean, we are retellers. We are writing on the stage, writing during the show, during the tale, the new tale. And we are, our experience, our personality, our energy is a filter. And that's, I see my role and my mission as a storyteller. sorry to be so pathetic, and I mean the pathos is coming out when I tell these words, but I feel that our responsibility is incredible. I mean, we are those among the other professionals who can really work with, especially among people inside societies that have this racism problem and ethnicity problems. And I live in such a country, so I can say that all my professional life I try to manage with stereotypes and help to find this coexistential way of living. So thank you very much.
Witold, if you wish to speak, go ahead.
Okay, sorry for the technical indiscipline, but discipline. But I will go further because I want to be very provocative with a short idea. As far as I'm not definitely white, not definitely South American Indian, I'm not definitely a man, I'm not definitely a woman. And I have many problems with that, but it's my own thing. But I've heard for a sort of a problem that I hear people saying we have many stories, but that's not what we want to tell. I understood the story like this, the topic like this. Those stories are stories that we do not want to tell, as if we were the Storyteller Society, some museum keepers that have from one side old stories from other times to tell, because we have to preserve them as they are, and we have another reality that do not fit to those stories. So for me, whether either we tell the old stories like museum keepers, okay, or we tell our stories, because those people there in the far past, they also told their stories and not stories from another time and another reality. If reality today is the gender problem, for instance, or anything, or the racist problem. So in my opinion, we should tell those stories, our stories, yes, and not try to change a knight into a princess and to see what would it bring. Yes, I know it's provocative.
It's not provocative. It's what do you call our story? I don't see what you're speaking about.
Okay,
what is
it's very clear. We all belong to a culture, to a sample of experiences. Yes, the fact that the stories, the classical stories, have been told in other times and in other reality, that it doesn't mean that we, as people from the 21st century, don't have our own stories. I think we have. I tell my own stories, and that's not only experience, self-experience, experience of what happened to me, the whole world. And well, why I am telling that? Because I haven't been raised here in Europe. I've been born very far in South America, in a culture that was my grandmother. He didn't write. I couldn't read and write until very late, because I have problems. I was basically in an oral culture, and when I came here to Europe, I saw something very exotic, and I would like to listen to your stories. It was only a sort of to explain, yes, to explain what I'm. We all have stories. We are not the only civilization, the only culture in whole thousands of years of human history that do not have their stories. I don't believe that. Everybody has his own story. Even if it's not a story of a knight, of a dragon, of a, I don't know what, of a big bird that covers the whole sky, anything.
Thank you. I will give the final word, I think, to Ragnhild, because we are already very much over time. And it's a very long discussion, and I also think we will not solve it today and probably not tomorrow either. And I hope we can have a lot more of these discussions actually. So I'm just saving some for later. So Ragnhild, go ahead.
Oh dear, I see Florian's thinking a lot and writing, so I think there's a lot going on there. But actually, no, I did want to make a comment about something that went on in the chat, which I found really interesting, and it really made me think, because I made this comment, and I want to talk about it, even though it's not to shut anyone up in the chat. I really appreciate your thoughts on that, because it really made me think. I said we are all the center of the universe. It's not in the meaning of that we feel that it is that we feel in the center of the universe, but the fact is we can only see the universe out of our own perspective. Unless we are mind travelers, we will always stay in this. I will always be here, even though whether I feel important, whether I'm rich, whether I'm poor, whether I'm white, whether I'm black, I'm always seeing it out of my own perspective. And I thought I'd give you a tiny little anecdote about that. I'm a little bit embarrassed about it, but I will say it anyway. The way I figured out that I'm the center of my universe is that the truth is the world map in my head is in the perspective of my childhood home. So I'm in the center. When I think of Switzerland, Switzerland is down and Norway is up. So when I think of where in Switzerland Bern is, it's on the right-hand side, which of course, if you think about it, it's not, because normal people see the map from below and up, and I see it right bang in the middle of where I grew up as a child. So the world turns around me, whether I feel the center of the universe or not. So that's what I meant, is the sense of that we cannot jump out of ourselves. We're right there. And that's good. It's just a challenge to be able to kind of really start looking at what does it mean not to be in your own shoes. And that's the question about privilege. It's about discrimination, it's stereotypes, it's the whole world. It's all the topics in this one thing. So that's, yeah. I wanted to follow up on that thread in the chat. So if you ever get confused of what is where in the world, ask me. I know exactly where it is.
That's a very, very good ending.
I think it is. Abbi, would you like to finish up, or shall I?
Oh, please, Katy, please. You know, we are French. There was one day, I remember one of my Norwegian niece who said to me, "Stop opening the door for me. Your French politeness. I'm a woman, I can open the door myself. I don't need you for that." It's a good, very good lesson.
Well, with those words, I would like to thank everybody for joining us. I would like to especially thank Abbi, Ragnhild, Flo, and Luís for very interesting talks and a very interesting discussion. And I promise that we will retake this discussion in I hope what will one day be again a live, really face-to-face kind of meeting. If not in the coming months, I promise we will do it online again. So, and if you have any other ideas for forums or to add to this discussion, please add it to the chat very fast, because I'll close it down in a few minutes. Or you can email me or whatever. It's been recorded. It will be on the Fest website. Apologizing already for how long it will take to get it on the Fest website, but it will be there. So you can, again, have a lot of joy in, I don't know, re-listening or watching it. So thank you for being here. Thank you everybody for participating. I wish you a very good night. Bye-bye, everybody.
Goodbye.